A leper came to Jesus, and kneeling down, begged him and said, "If you wish, you can make me clean." Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand, touched him, and said to him, "I do will it, be made clean." The leprosy left him immediately, and he was made clean. Then, warning him sternly, he dismissed him at once. He said to him, "See that you tell no one anything, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing what Moses prescribed. That will be proof for them." The man went away and began to publicize the whole matter. He spread the report abroad so that it was impossible for Jesus to enter a town openly. He remained outside in deserted places, and people kept coming to him from everywhere. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
I can always tell when the height of cold and flu season arrives. First, I hear all that coughing and sniffling going on when I'm trying to preach. Next, I notice that people seem to be avoiding all contact with each other during the sign of peace. But the real giveaway happens after Mass when I'm outside and people keep refusing my outstretched hand. Momentarily, I think I should be offended. Was it something I said? But then I see the used Kleenex they're clutching in their hand and the red nose and the watery eyes, and any offense quickly turns to gratitude. Miraculously, I haven't gotten a cold yet this year, and so if you're sick, let me just say thank you very much for staying away from me. Of course, when we're sick, we like to stay away from other people anyways. We call in from work and stay home from school, stay in bed, just give me a cup of tea and leave me alone. And other people are equally happy to leave us alone because they don't want to get anything. But this very natural desire of keeping people who are sick and people who are well far away from each other can be taken to an extreme. We see that in the Old Testament today, where the Israelites had a law that if you developed a rash or a splotch on your skin, you had to go show yourself to the priest. Now, I'm really glad this is not part of my job description anymore, but the priest would have to determine whether this was the dread disease of leprosy. And if it was leprosy, that person would be kicked out of the community completely. They would have to go live on their own on the edge of town. As they wandered about in deserted places, they would even have to shout out, "Unclean, unclean," if anyone came nearby, so that someone could kind of give them a wide berth. Now, on one level, this law made perfect sense. After all, leprosy was this terrible disease that would eat away at your flesh, and it was highly, highly contagious. And so it made sense for that community to separate out people with leprosy so that the disease wouldn't spread. Even today, we might isolate or quarantine a person that has a dread disease so that the disease doesn't spread. But there's something that still doesn't sit quite right with us about this law. Something still seems missing from a hard and strict interpretation of a law that would really cut off a sick person completely. Maybe what's missing is what Jesus teaches us. That every human being, no matter how sick or old or handicapped they may be, no matter how stuck they might be in sin or addiction, no matter how unwanted they may be by the rest of society, each and every person is made in the image and likeness of God and should be welcomed and treated and accepted and loved as such. We see Jesus treating people that way all the time. How does Jesus treat a leper? He reaches out his hand, touches him, and says, "Be made clean." Can you imagine the shock of the people who were watching that scene unfold, that Jesus was getting anywhere near a leper? What a reckless act. What total disregard for the very sensible law of the land, that you don't go near a leper because you might spread the disease. And yet Jesus saw that person not as an example of an abstract law. He saw that person as someone who should be cherished and loved. And so he wanted to reach out to communicate to him something of God's love, which never leaves any of us all alone. that touch changes everything for that leper. In that touch, Jesus doesn't become unclean. The leper becomes clean. Jesus doesn't get sick. The leper is healed. And the leper doesn't just receive a physical healing. That touch restores the leper to the community. It washes away any stigma of sin that was attached to that disease, as if somehow sin could cause a disease like that. And it embraces that man in God's love. We must be like Jesus. We must treat other people the same way as he did. Now, love doesn't mean you do something stupid. You know, the nursing home this week was under quarantine because the flu was going around. Well, I stayed far away. I wasn't going to, no point in going up there if I'm just going to get the disease or if I'm going to spread the disease from room to room. Someone was telling me yesterday that they've had the flu going around their house for the last month. And the UPS man came over the other day to drop off a package, and they said to the UPS man, well, don't come in because, you know, we have the flu here. The UPS man dropped that package like a hot potato on the porch and ran the other way. He did the signature himself because he doesn't want to do something stupid and to expose himself to the illness. But sometimes, in order to take care of a person, we do have to accept a certain amount of risk, a certain amount of sacrifice. Sometimes people do that even in a very heroic way. We can look at the example of a saint like St. Damien of Molokai, who went to live among the lepers in Hawaii for 20 years. And he took care of them, he said mass for them, he built hospitals, and finally he himself contracted the disease and died of it. We can think of the thousands of nuns who, in the influenza epidemic of the 1920s, stayed in the hospitals to take care of sick people, even though many of them were getting the disease. We can think of Saint Mother Teresa of Calcutta, who would pick up the poorest of the poor from the gutters and reach out just like Jesus and touch and embrace people that the rest of society considered untouchable. In our own society, we're so used to things like hospitals and nursing homes and homeless shelters and food pantries. We just kind of assume that there's somewhere for people to go who are in need, that we forget that these things really didn't exist until Jesus came along and taught people that this is how we should treat people. These institutions didn't exist until Christians came along and said, we have to treat other people as Jesus did. We need to help people. In ancient Rome, before Christianity, if you got sick, well, if you were rich enough, you could probably hire a doctor or buy some medicine, but if you were poor, you might just be left on the street to die. In fact, what made the Christians so unique and what made their way of life so attractive was that the Christians would go and pick up those people and bring them home and take care of them. And the Romans would say, my goodness, look at those Christians. They love one another. I want to be like that. And so, as Catholics, we can be very proud that the Catholic Church throughout the world every day feeds and clothes and shelters and educates more people than any other organization on earth. Even right here in our parish, we have many people right now who are organizing the food drive that we're going to be having this Lent for the food pantry. People who serve on the Respect Life Committee to stand up for the dignity of the weakest among us. We have people who go and visit the homebound, people in the nursing home every single week and bring them communion and keep them abreast of what's happening in the community. Life has become increasingly difficult for many people because of the breakup of families and the loss of jobs, because of income inequality, the increase in mental illness, decrease in church attendance. Many, many people in our society are feeling very alone and isolated, that maybe they're left without hope or motivation. How do we reach out and touch those lepers of today? How do we be like Jesus and treat the people in our life? How do we treat the people that we work with, the employees at the stores we shop at, the people in the pews next to us? Do we treat people as just we're trying to get some product or service out of them and then move on? Do we treat people as strangers and we kind of hope they stay that way? Or do we greet people? Do we get to know them? Do we invite them into the parish community? Do we stand in awe and respect of another person made in God's own image right in front of me? When we reach out to help other people, that could be very much the way that Jesus wants to reach out his healing hand to people today. It's Jesus, after all, who reaches out his healing hand to us. We who so often feel lost and alone, we who so often are burdened by sin and sickness, Jesus reaches out his hand to us. We are the lepers. And Jesus says, be healed. His touch is God's embrace.